Welcome. Oh,
Mike
you're
stole
seeing
your
around
thunder.
me. Sorry? Is it going for again?
Oh no, I said Mike is trying to steal your thunder with the dips.
This is Sonic Alley Studios behind me here.
It's gorgeous, dude.
I custom built this studio like in 2014 after I got out of college, 2-year degree that I got there. So I went to MIA, which is like a full-on music industry training college. Everything from being an artist to managing an artist to being an engineer, producer, the whole works. Learning music law to like write contracts, like everything you could ever imagine, right? And then so I was an engineer at the start and an artist, so I chose more of like the engineering kind of stuff, got amazing marks in that. And then I started this studio after I got out of here, right? And it's been like a slow, I had it open for about 6 years and took clients off the street, but nothing really came of it. They didn't really release music on DSPs or anything like official like that, right? So then I ended up just taking a year off and trying to figure things out, and I went private. And then I've been working with this guy, Lil White Lie, locally for the past like 3 years. And we've done like 2.5 albums so far. That we've released the 2 albums. We're working on the third one right now. And then I just became an artist this year for the first time ever after 10 years of doing mixing and stuff for everybody else. So now's my time to shine, I guess, too. So that's a little bit about me. We're going to get into some compression today after we do the rest of the intros. Just starting with like the very basics. What is compression? We'll start with that, but I'll let everybody else say hi and let us know what you do too.
Perfect. I'll go next because it's my server. But hey, wanted to also say he's being very humble. He actually just dropped a new single. You guys need to go and check him out. It's absolutely fantastic. So share your artist name, man.
Man, it's Chris Collins. It's
It's
right up
just
there.
that I thought you were Sonic Alley.
No, that's just the name
That's
of
the
the
studio.
studio,
Ah,
right?
shoot. My
That we're
bad,
in,
buddy.
right? Like when I had it open, it was called Sonic Alley Studios. You could book a session at Sonic Alley Studios, but now I just use Sonic Alley as my studio. And if
Okay, I got
you
you.
get a
I
mix
got
out
you.
of this room, it's kind of like, I don't know, winning the lottery or something. You know what I mean? So
I hear you, brother. Well,
yeah,
yeah,
so we're actually going to be looking at that single today. This is the single up on the screen.
that's
So
right. I thought it sounded familiar. Well, perfect. It's a
yeah,
great
so
song, man. So everybody go jam it outside of the session too, whenever y'all get a second. But I'll go on ahead and introduce myself. I'm Azio. I go by Sean or Azio, whichever one. Feel free to call me whatever makes sense. I've been doing music since I was in junior high. Picked up guitar and have been playing pretty religiously ever since then. Been doing EDM for like the past 5 years. I've been doing it very poorly. I do like some ridiculous take of orchestral EDM that also is just like way too infused with dubstep or not dubstep, excuse me, dead mouse and seven-string guitar. So it's chaos sometimes, but I love it and I'm happy you guys are here with me today. So we'll go on ahead and let somebody else introduce or talk about themselves.
Uh, I think I is it okay if I
yeah, bro, send it.
okay, so my name is Kizanas, A.k.a. Moses, real life name. I've been producing for like 10 years now. I started like around 2013, 2014 on FL Studio, went to Ableton in 2, 3 years, and then I'm now always using Ableton. I produce like progressive house, electro house. Sometimes I dabble in drum and bass and dubstep and like Edzo said, like I do a lot of orchestral stuff. Like I just have like an orchestral breakdown in most of my songs and add string violin solos and shit like that. It's really fun, and I actually like I try to like the way I think of it is like I try to make music that's like commercial quality, but it doesn't sound commercial. Like it sounds unique. So I don't know how like you know yeah.
All right, whoever wants to go. Well, I'll make Alec go next.
Okay. My name is Alec, and I'm Schwa. That's my it's just a high school nickname that stuck with me forever. So I just instead of coming up with a new name, I just used what I had. I've been doing EDM for on and off, I'd say about 12, 13 years. Never really took it too seriously until recently. One of my buddies, a dubstep artist named Moss, um, got me to take it more seriously. I used to do dubstep. Originally started with tech house. Deadmau5 is like one of my favorite producers of all time. Um, and Now I've landed on synthwave. So I kind of really like the songwriting aspect of it, and I feel like it just suits me better than dubstep or any other genre. So now I'm just kind of trying to meet other people who are in that genre, but also getting tips from other genre artists as well. And I think at some point I can still kind of infuse synthwave with other things like electro and whatever else I can think of. So really, right now, I'm just trying to focus on my sound, focus on being a better overall producer, and focus on getting my mixes better because I have a severe to mild, well, at this point, pretty severe hearing loss in both my ears. So anything like mid range and higher, it's kind of hard for me to hear. So yeah, I'm looking forward to learning from everyone.
I
Oh,
don't
I
think we
can't.
can hear you right now, bro.
Oh,
Now I
sorry.
can.
Yeah, I forgot I muted myself. I was going to say, Mike, you're the last one. Introduce yourself and make it good.
Shit. Fuck. I'm hitting buttons. Hold on. All right.
What is this? Dead
He
mouse?
did
No,
it.
I'm
He
kidding.
did it. He made his entry. There you go.
I thought my mic was muted. Yeah, I'm Mike. Me and Sean used to play in a like metal band together. I've done everything from like death metal to pop rock to parody music to commercials, jingles, electronic. And I've kind of dabbled in a little bit of everything. I'm a guitar player by trade, by education, and like Chris, I went to a similar school called the Radio Film or Film Radio and Recording uh, Academy, which was mostly in. It was cool because you did all your classwork inside of a local studio that you were interning at. So the engineer was part of the school. It's pretty cool. I do a lot of outboard. I'm a huge analog nerd. If you have questions about physical hardware or anything like that, I could probably point you in the right direction. I use mostly Logic Pro, and Final Cut Pro for like commercials and stuff like that. I don't have an artist name.
Well, he's lovingly known around the server as Beef Sleepins or the resident server troll. Outside of that, though, we'll let Chris go on ahead and take over. We now, Chris, officially have a we now officially have a Zoom subscription, so you take all the time you need, man.
I don't even know what that means, but sure.
We ran out of time on our meeting already.
Oh, okay, sure. Well, so we'll start off with what is compression? What do you guys think compression is? I'll take a audience poll first and find out. How would you describe compression?
I would say it is a plugin that helps to, or some sort of audio element that helps to standardize and kind of level out the sounds depending on how you set it.
Right. So actually, let me turn on my camera here for a second. Lift this up so you can see it. It's one of these guys. It's just a fader, and it goes really fast, essentially, right? So I mean, as it hears the audio, it's going up or down based on whatever it's hearing, however you set it at whatever speed you set it at. It's a volume controller, right? In its most basic sense, right? So it has all these little some of them have settings on them, some of them don't. You'll notice here, I'll bring up a few of them on the screen here. And you'll notice like an LA2A style compressor like this FG2A right here, it doesn't have a lot of controls on it. All it has is like a amount of peak reduction. So a signal's coming into it. And if you don't have any signal peak reduction, you're just hearing it go back out again, right? and then you add peak reduction to it, and boom, you've got your signal compressed. Like, it's very simple that way. It's the LA2A was made for vocals just for that reason, and it had a specific curve, attack ratio, all that stuff to it. So let's get into what an actual compressor actually has on it, first of all, and what they do, right? So you have almost all compressors will have some kind of an input stage to them, and they act differently based on what type of compressor they are. So there's a few different types where, for instance, if I have this compressor, the distressor right here, which, I mean, I'm sure Mike, he's an analog guy, he's probably got one sitting there or something, right? But
I wish I did. I use a 1073 and an 1176
okay.
outboard stack for my vocals.
Yeah, so okay, let's go to an 1176 style, like the first one on this rack right here. So if I turn that input down to 0, there's going to be no audio coming through the plugin at all. And that's just the way that compressor works, where it needs to have that setting for anything to even work on that compressor. Whereas if you have this red compressor over here, which is more like a modern FET compressor, it has all the, like, it has a threshold on top of here that you can bring down on top of the signal. Otherwise, the signal just passes right through there and you'll hear it out the other side. Whereas both of these style compressors right here, you'll hear nothing if you don't have input turned up on them. It's just the style of the way that they're designed electronically, because it's kind of, as like technology progressed, so did compression. So we started out with like a tube compression, and it acted a lot slower, and it couldn't actually like tame really fast signals. It could only go to like 70 milliseconds, or a lot of them were like 200 milliseconds, like the max speed they could achieve, right? Where as time went on, they were able to use voltage circuits and IC chips and things as detectors for the actual compression to happen. And that allowed the speeds to increase on what we could actually do with a compressor, right? So we have like the input stage. Then we, on this other compressor here, we have threshold, which is going to set at which point of loudness coming through there is it going to start to affect the actual signal at, right? And that kind of goes hand in hand with your ratio right here. And that's going to be by how much does it change the signal once it's active, right? So those are kind of the two, probably the most two important ones of the whole bunch, because attack and release, they're more like settings of how that operates after the fact of setting that, right? Whereas like an LA2A style, you're just setting the amount of compression that you're adding to that signal. And it's got a preset ratio and a preset attack and release. They happen to sound good on vocals. Yeah, so what happens when you set an attack and release on a compression, like on anyone that has these settings, the attack setting is going to be how fast does that reach compression ratio once the detector circuit hears it. So that's your attack setting. And then the release is after it's activated and hit that ratio, how long does it stay on before it comes back off, right? So then using these little, and the other feature about it is, so when you do compression, it's like, it's one of those like guru audio engineer kind of things where you're supposed to level match a compressor regardless, as we learn in audio school, right? So when you put a compressor on a signal, it's supposed to sound the same loudness decibel level when it comes back out the compressor, even if it's been affected in whatever way that the compressor changed that signal, right? So then you have what's called a makeup gain. So they look different depending on which type of compressor you have, but every one of them will have an output gain. This one will have just gain right here that you're making up or losing depending on how you compressed it. This one actually has a makeup gain. So your SSL style ones also have that kind of thing. I believe this one might actually have an auto makeup gain, a lot like the LA2A style ones, where they actually aim to hit that level back to where it was with like a digital IC detector chip in the actual compressor. And so those ones kind of act on their own sometimes, and they're pretty accurate, but I'd rather just hear one. The way that we do it usually in the studio is we'll add compression to something, and then you just in this plugin, I just turn the power off like this and bypass it so I can hear what the sound will be without it, right? And then you're listening back and forth, and if it's louder, you're going to pull it down to wherever it should be. It's almost always going to be louder when you're compressing something if you do it. Just, and then we're going to get into next. Did I miss anything so far? That's what I wondered.
I'm tracking with you.
Yeah, no, yeah, we're following you, Chris.
Yeah, so there's different types of compressors. I touched on it a little bit there. We have like 3 or 4 main types. There's going to be tube or optical compression, which is like the old school one. The one I actually used, I'm trying to remember. I used one in the studios at Fanshawe, and it was called a Joe Meek MC5, if I'm correct.
Oh yeah.
Right? Those old school optical compressors, and they actually, the detector is a light. And when the light
Yeah.
gets a certain brightness, then that's when the circuit kicks in, right? So it's kind of using voltage, but it's very slow because it's transferring energy into light first before it can see it, kind of thing, right? So that was kind of like the first way they compressed with, right? Using like an Edison bulb way back. And I mean, these compressors were like, they could be the size of a room when they were trying to make these things in the beginning. Now they're in a little box on a table kind of thing, right? So then we move on and we got a second type of compressor. What was the second one? It was a FET compressor, I believe. And they were able to,
Yeah.
yeah, and
It
then
was
voltage
when
control ones. Right.
radio broadcasts started getting more popular. They needed a way to level the signal being sent out to
Right.
other people's receivers because you could theoretically pump out too much frequency and blow up somebody's
Yeah. In
surround
the
sound and
broadcast world,
radio.
right. The way that like radio signals work is they're almost like a record player. And if you cut a record too big, it just breaks the actual track that it's in, right? Same
Yeah.
thing with radio. If you turn a radio amplifier too high up, it can actually cook things. It's like microwaves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they start distorting and doing the same thing audio does, but we're talking like hundreds of gigahertz instead, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they developed these compressors out of a need, out of technology increasing. And so eventually we get to the newest ones called VCA compressors, which use like digital IC chips, and they're capable of like picosecond action speeds and stuff like that. And it really allows us as engineers to now take sounds and mold them in the way that we want, right? So the next thing we'll talk about is, what do we use a compressor for? What do you guys usually use a compressor for? I'll ask the crowd. What do you guys usually typically put a
Uh,
compressor?
would you use it to make room?
Well,
I
I'm more
use it
set, like, what
for
would you put it on? A vocal, a drum, and why? You know what I mean?
Yes.
Drums, right?
drums. Yeah, drums are for drums. I like to use it to get it like make it sound very heavy.
Like a snappy kind of sound to it, right?
Yeah, like yeah,
Right. So
like
yeah. So I kind of categorize compression into 2 categories. We're either going to be leveling, or we're going to be envelope shaping, I'll call it, where we're actually going to modify the tone or the shape of the sound that is happening on purpose for artistic reasons, right?
yeah, the transients, right?
Right. So we can change the way they actually operate using the attack and release controls, right? So I'm actually going to try, if I can, to get into this a little bit visually for you here and see if we, so what I have here, here's my main vocal for the track. Maybe I'll just play like the first bit of this track so you can hear it again. I'll just play it off the top and I'll go to like the end of that first section there so you can hear it. And now this is with all the processing that I have on the final master that got released put on it. And then we'll show you why and how I did it all, okay? I don't always really want to know, but everyone around me seems to push me to. I don't always really want to go, but everyone around me seems to force me to. I said, ooh, right now, I won't ever be alone without you. And I said, ooh, right now, and I know that I'll always stay true. I'm coming back to you. All right, so there we have it, right? Now, the main thing I want to show you here, I'm going to actually record this track. I've got it set up. I don't got it set up, but I will. Into the, is that the one? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I want to actually record. The main thing to understand here is, so I have compression going on here right now, obviously. And it doesn't, the audio signal does not look like that on the way out of the track that we actually hear in the mix, right? So this is what's on it currently. I have a classic 2-stage approach to most things I'm doing. I have a virtual microphone system on the whole thing first, right?
Dude, that microphone is sick, bro.
Yeah, so I bought a Slate VMS microphone system. It's about a $1,500 kit. It comes with a preamp and it emulates about $50,000 worth of like classic stuff. So that's the way I took my whole approach. I have all virtual everything. I don't have any analog gear here except for preamps, but it all models the real stuff. So so yeah, I use an approach of 2 compressors on my own vocal here. And part of the reason for that is I need a lot of compression on my vocal because I am very like erratic with my loudnesses. Like the difference between some of my notes are huge, like 20 dB sometimes. So I like to put a 2-stage approach on it. So I'll just hit play while the vocals and we can kind of see what's happening visually on these meters here too. So you're not going to hear the vocal because I have it routed right now, but that's what it's actually doing to it, right? So we're shaving about 10 dB off of it with this compressor here and just a little bit more right here to kind of tame everything else that was happening that I couldn't get with this guy, right? And you'll notice that I kind of have a late attack set here and a really fast release, so it recovers really quick. So it's getting a lot of information, but only after it's passed a certain amount, okay? That's why I have that one set. And so we're gonna actually record this out and see what happened to it as a result of doing that, okay? So I'm just gonna record this. For some reason, it always clips the vocal rider on the front too, for some reason. It's stupid. Okay, I'm just gonna do that much so we can actually zoom in here and have a look at what happened to it here. If I can ever make that work again. Why can't I get there? Okay, so we look here. So what's happening is that little bit of the waveform right there is getting massively increased, right? And that's going to be like when I say the word I, right? The very first word, it's really going to be like almost like an impact of the word instead of just like a soft spoken word or whatever, right? It's on purpose. We do this in vocals. We're trying to get the whole thing. When I treat a vocal in the studio, I'm trying to hear the whole thing, like every little bit of that vocal as it kind of plays out, even within a word, but then shape it so that it can cut through a mix and still you're hearing all the consonants and stuff that happens to that, right? So even like this is what I really see right here, this little section. When you look at it compared to this, if I could match these size-wise, so the exact same volume even, see the difference there? And you really get the effect of this compression also is bringing up those low sounds so that you can hear some of that little information, right? And that's going to be some of the more articulate stuff in a vocal that's like that weird airy overtone type stuff that you're not going to get if you don't compress it up, right? And that's really to me what makes a vocal kind of sound finished or full when you're making like a mix. That I can always tell when somebody's got too much compression or no compression on a vocal. Like one sounds unfinished, the other one just sounds overproduced right away, right? So you're trying to find a balance of what I'm always trying to make it sound natural, so you're not going to hear the compression happen if possible, right? So yeah, that's kind of what a little bit of a result. I wonder if we could actually change one of these compressors and get a different result out of the recording. So if I take this attack and bring it way faster, okay, and I re-record this now, you're going to see no front on the front of this, hopefully. There it is, right? So if we compare that now, I'll just drag it down here. See what the difference in the change there? So it still compresses a little bit, but nowhere near what I was doing right on the tip right there. You see that? So by changing the attack speed, I'm cutting off that first consonant that's going to happen instead. So it's actually going to like bury back into the mix. You would never hear that I right off the front if it was really thick, right? So that's kind of the effect of these controls, how you can shape the tone of it. Now it's happening really fast. We're talking milliseconds here. Like the entire word's only 400 milliseconds long or something. You know what I mean? So like we're getting down into like almost 10, 20 milliseconds time range there to get that front. And so if you want to on purpose, if you ever have a vocal that is too bitey, you turn your attack really fast and you can take some of that bite off of it and make it sound normal again, because we're really just trying to level things for a vocal, right? Let me go back to my notes here. Kind of off track again. Any questions so far? Might as well open it up for a minute and see if we can If there's anything that I can expand on that you need understanding on or anything like that.
Yeah, I was just curious here. So you set the attack a lot faster on the kind of green flip. What how did you have the one set for the kind of the burgundy or the maroon?
Oh yeah. Yeah, so if we go back here, I'll just go back. I think I can just
Yeah, I'm
I
not
had
used
it
to
up
seeing the
around
dots.
7. It was about 7.
Oh,
It's
okay.
so yeah, it's just really late. I mean, a 5 would be kind of halfway between, right? It was kind of late. So it's letting that consonant come through before it attacks it, right? Before
Gotcha.
it clamps down on the signal.
Mhm.
But yeah, on this compressor, because it's a distressor, it can act very, very fast. So if you turn it up to the 0, but it's like microseconds, it can cut right off, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm not hitting it hard, and you saw that result. If I was up into limited territory, it would like cut the front right off the vocal, right? You wouldn't
Yeah.
even hear the start of that at all. For as long as and if I turn up the release, I can have that effect happen. Let's try that actually. We're gonna go like this, and I'll turn the release off way longer so that it's gonna happen. Compression is gonna stay happening for a lot longer when I record this one, okay? So see how it got, you can actually, this is
Oh
beautiful.
yeah, it's
So
random.
this is how long that release was set for. You can actually see it. And you can see where it released and let back off on the signal again, right? So it's a visual way. You're literally modifying the way that that waveform comes back at you, right? Does that make a little more sense?
Yeah, so I have a question about that, and I don't want to. I hope I don't sidetrack.
Yeah.
So like for situations, let's say you're putting the compression on a synth, right, and it's like a pluck or something, and it's like fast. So there's a lot of sound, and it's very fast.
Right.
Uh, your release, you would want it to happen quicker, right? So it can get to that, it can compress that next note as soon as possible, as soon as it hits.
Yeah, a lot of the times, so there's different theories of how to apply the release of a compression. So if you're trying to modify the envelope of something, like really change the structure of how that sound is actually coming back at you, then you can play with that a lot. But like you're right, in a song situation, you want to meet the groove of the track too. So you want to have, like, if you're playing a note like but, you want that compressor to be ready for the next one before and have fully recovered to where you want it to. Or I mean, some people use it the opposite way, and on purposely it's not ready yet, so it sounds weird when it starts again, right? Like there's
Yeah.
all kinds of different tricks you can employ there, but yeah, you're right. Generally, you want to set that release to kind of
Yeah.
flatter the track that it's on, right?
But ultimately, it depends on what you're trying to get out of it too. So it doesn't necessarily have like a right or wrong way. It's just what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, exactly. So
Okay,
if I
cool.
mean, if you're trying to modify something to make it wacky and different, then yeah, you can play with that setting a huge amount and just get crazy things that you can have the middle of that vocal sound dip right in the middle of it. It'll act really late, but then compress for a long time and then come off or something, right? Like you
Hmm.
have the ability to change it however you want. And
Hmm.
I actually implore you, set something up like a bus like this while you're compressing when you're learning and see the result that you get from what you did, right? It's a good way to kind of see the results and learn what you're actually causing change to in that audio signal, right?
Yeah.
Uh, I just to add a little note. This brings to mind a plugin that I use. It's called Track Spacer. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yeah, actually have, yeah.
Yeah, Track Spacer is really cool because it lets you sidechain the frequencies of one sim for whatever to whatever channel you have it routed to,
Yeah.
and so it's really useful for low end stuff, low end frequencies, but it's just as good for high end stuff too.
Yeah, so at least in Pro Tools, I can actually show you this. I have the ability to just set up a key in some of these plugins. I'm not sure if this one will have it or not. I don't think that one has it, but other compressors that I have, like just even your stock compressors that come in Pro Tools, like this guy right here, it'll have this little key, and you can set up your own side chain from any bus that you have running. So you just put like an aux bus output on any channel that you want to be the listener one, and it'll send that to this compressor and only activate when it hears it. Same kind of thing as that track spacer plugin, but you can apply it across anything. You can literally have a
Nice.
vocal trigger the bass, or you can have a kick drum trigger the 808 in a mix, or you can have anything trigger the other thing, right? Yeah, track space is pretty dope, man. I gotta get my hands on it actually, because I have heard like amazing things about other things you can do with it.
It's seriously, it's a great plugin. One of my friends recommended it to me. One of my a trance producer recommended it to me. I was like, I wasn't sure if it was going to be useful because I don't produce trance frequently, but then I used it and I'm like, holy shit, this thing is awesome because it literally, like, for example, let's say you want to side chain a sub bass to a kick drum. If you have, like, let's say a kick drum that sounds like Swedish House Mafia's kick drums, which is like, like very punchy and big, like yeah, if you have that and you have a lot of sub bass in your bass line, then if you sidechain it using track space tracker, it evens it out, and they still, both of them, like,
Yeah, it's gonna help
come
it
to,
all together, right? You're gonna not have as much distortion going on when the two are playing together because the one's kind of ducking under the other one, right?
Yep.
yeah.
And actually, that leads me to another thing I was going to talk about that I forgot about altogether. So different
Oh,
uses of compression.
hold on
Sorry?
one sec, Chris. We got a question from Mike
Oh,
before we move on.
yeah, for sure.
It's not really as much of a question as it's more of a what the last gentleman was just talking about. You can, if you don't find something to be useful, like genre specific, a lot of these plugins aren't genre specific plugins. I mean, there are some things that are genre specific, but if you're using, like, just general compression stuff like that, or you find some software that you find new and interesting, I always recommend people to try stuff that's out of the norm, because that's where you find, like, unique and creative sounds from. Like, people people are getting back into, like, tape and vinyl saturation for the first time in, like, decades, and you can tell the artists that are taking risks with, like, printing to tape or printing to vinyl and printing to outboard compressors that aren't normal. I think Deadmau5 even talked about this. So you wouldn't use an 1176 on a EDM kick. Doesn't make, or he said something like that. But it's a good way to stay creative if you get stuck in a rut, is to, try these things on non-traditional sources, I guess you could say.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. I actually keep a random bunch of different instruments and things around the studio here just for that purpose.
Yeah.
Things to look at, even not even instruments, just like cool stuff to, like, stare at. Like, I got a floating moon that, like, levitates, stuff like that, right?
Nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
I mean,
different. Sorry.
like, it's kind of interesting how people sample things, like Charlie Perf and some other producers, like, they're ridiculous, man.
Yeah, we can turn a little spoon into, like, a kick drum, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, anyways,
I turned a vocal into a synth once.
yeah, have you ever heard of trigger? Slate trigger. You can trigger a drum from anything. So you could literally play, like, on your lap or whatever with a microphone, and as long as it's got, like, a transient to it, you can turn that into, like, a snare drum.
That's
Yeah.
badass.
And you just
Slate
put it
Trigger
as
is
a
pretty
plugin
sweet.
on top. Yeah. Yeah, leading me into my next one. Different uses of compression. So we have compression on a vocal track, we have compression on a drum, a single drum, right? Like a snare drum where we want to make the sound of the snare come out on the back end. So we make the release really fast so that it comes off really fast, right? Stuff like that. Or we want the snap of a snare drum to be really hard. So we put the attack late on it so that we don't compress the very first start of it, and we get compress the rest of it and make that transient snap right out of it way bigger, right? Then we have the next one, which would be putting a stereo compressor onto, like, a set of drums, including the cymbals and all that other stuff, right? So in that case, I don't have one in this one, I don't think. Maybe I do. Oh, I do. You guys are lucky today. So the drums in the session, right? For some reason, I cannot get, like, this freaking thing is not, it's in the way all the time, bro.
Oh, by the way, the Slate digital plugins are such a great value.
Man, I've been using them since 20. So Fanshawe had a deal with Slate plugins for $50. You could just buy a license for any of them when they had them at the time. They didn't even have virtual mix rack at that point. It was like 2012. I bought everything they had. I bought the tape
Yeah,
machine, bought the bus racks, I bought it all. Then they went to subscriptions. I still had all these things. So I sold them all off and I haven't been paying for the subscription ever since. I'm still in profit
man,
right now from it. So but yeah, moving on to
that's
this
a
one, right?
deal.
Oh yeah, so I've had this for years. I actually sold a copy of it and I still use it. So
Like what? That's a great like next to Universal Audio and like Waves emulations of hardware.
100%.
Slate
That's
is like is it's crazy how accurate. Like I shot out a Slate 1176 and a Slate 1073 and a UA 1073 and vice versa against
yeah.
my hardware, my physical like analog hardware, and they're so close. Like it's like there's negligible differences, but it's like
Well, and I was in a real
unless you're
studio,
looking
right?
for them, yeah, unless you're looking for them, you're never gonna like tell the difference between the digital plug-in and my hardware. I
Right.
just like turning knobs with my hands because I'm a freak.
No, but that was the reason why I bought the Slate plugins off the top is
Yeah,
I learned how to mix on an SSL duality, like a $250,000
sick.
console, right? And
Yeah,
it had like an LA2A and distressors and all that stuff behind me physically in a rack, right? And what I
mm-hmm.
heard at my apartment when I got my Slate plugins was what I heard at that studio. I was like, holy shit, it's the same thing, but it's on a
Yeah,
plug, right?
they're
All
so
the other
so
stuff I heard
accurate.
didn't sound like that, right? Like Waves doesn't sound accurate like that to me. UAD did sound really accurate, but it was using like those cards, right?
Yeah,
So like
the
this was my way in.
Universal Audio is their plugins are great, but the jump the loops that you have to jump through to use them is
Right.
stupid.
Yeah, so I wanted that stuff, but I couldn't afford it for the hardware of it at the time. And this stuff sounded great and was like $15 a month or something, right? So it just a no-brainer to have it.
Yeah,
But yeah, so compression on a bus instead of just on a single thing. So we're using it here to add attack to the whole drum kit in a I believe this is just compressing it. It's not even going to be like a parallel compression. So it's only doing a tiny bit in the actual track. We'll just play it real quick here so we can see it. So it's barely moving right here, right? And it's adding a little bit of like a warmth and like a poppiness to it that the Veramu compressor is known for. I literally just threw it up on there to get that little bit of a sound on it. And it's doing like the tiniest little bit, right? So you have that type of bus compression where it's on like a set of something. So often if I don't know if I did it here, but a lot of times when I mix hip hop, I'll put all of the like the vocal group into a bus of its own in an aux track. It gives me a nice spot to check the level of all those vocals together to make sure they're not too loud going into the master. And B, I can then apply some of this and get vocals to level out to. So I'll spread 6 vocals out across the stereo spectrum. I'll have 2 on the far outsides, a couple kind of halfway between, and then like a lead vocal and a double in the middle or whatever. And it doesn't sound flat. Like when it comes back at you, they're all over the place. It's almost as if they were standing not in a line on a stage. They were kind of like one guy's 2 feet back, one guy's a foot back, guy's forward, right? You want that line coming at you as a vocal visually and you're like a visual representation of it to be even across that stereo field. So using this type of bus compression to lower all of those down and then bring them all up so they're the same and then bring them back out, it really helps you to level it across the stereo field, right? So that's kind of like the way 2 to use it. And then I got a third way here where I'm using it on like a rack for like the sauce of the entire mix here. And on this one, it's kind of a secret that I employ. I use this middle rack right here is my main guy right here. It's an emulation of a Focusrite Red compressor, and it's set up. I use like a preset up here, but then I modify it. I add more drive to it. I used this thing in the real studio, and it just sounded right, and I've always used it on every mix ever since. So you can take this plugin and just throw it up on a mix and it completely changes your mix without even using the compressors, just from the analog juice it gives it. It's like my little secret. So yeah, I have that type of compressor. So multi stages of compression. If you look at a mix that I've done, you've got compression on each individual thing. You've got compression on a group. You got the final bus compression right here. Then on my mastering chain, I've got another level of compression doing like 1.5 ratio, very little. And it's only going to take off a dB on the left and right or so. And that's what's happening across the whole mix. I don't even think it's right now. It's on the wrong setting, but if I can put it to the right spot, you can see it activate here. So it's literally just kind of following the track. I've got these set so it's late and kind of coming off fast. So it's kind of not doing a whole lot to the track. It's kind of happening after the fact. It's just kind of taming anything that's left, right? And I mean, that's compression. That's how I use it. That's how it all works. Is then it comes down to being able to hear it properly. For the first 5 years that I was in music school and a couple of years after I got out of music school, I couldn't tell what the fuck a compressor was even doing, right? I couldn't actually hear the difference between when I changed that. I could see it, but I'm like, couldn't tell what the hell was going on, right? And it came down for me to like acoustics in the studio room. As I built out like the proper treatments and got this room sounding proper to mix in, all of a sudden I could hear all these things change by a decibel or less even. So, I mean, if you're having trouble hearing some of this stuff, I suggest starting with headphones. You can probably hear it a little better. Just having it closer to your ears, and most headphones are closer to accurate than a wildly inaccurate room of monitors, right? So that's the first place I would go to try and learn this stuff is like sit there with headphones on and try and hear the differences as you move these little knobs, right? But yeah, other than that, that's pretty much the presentation.
Cool, cool, cool. Question. So when you're mixing a track, you don't necessarily have to compress everything or like individually or
You don't have to,
um
no. I mean, I often do just because I'm looking to change things about that sound that I want to hear, right?
mhm.
So it's kind of like first, like a lot of the times, I didn't even talk about this, but I use a C4 compressor on a vocal a lot. I'll bring it up just to show you it real quick. I'll just bring one up. And I'll take a C4, which is a multi-band compressor. So it can happen across 4 different frequency bands, right? And I'll turn like 3 of them off and use it as like a de-esser that I can change like the frequency pattern of, right? If I'm having a little bit too much of a bite just in S's, even after my de-esser and compression and all that stuff, you can come in here with one of these and just kind of tame it in a specific frequency range if you want, right?
Nice.
Yeah, just a little trick I've been employing lately. Actually, I think I learned it from Lou Diaz. He says, take a vocal, especially for vocals, when you're going to treat a vocal, sit there with nothing on it and just listen to it and find what you don't like about the tone of it. And then use a compressor like this to go in surgically and get rid of that stuff first before you even attempt to compress it. And you'll end up with a result that you like better just right off the hop from that. There you go, little free tip.
Yeah, nice. Nice. Hey, I don't know if you saw the chat, but I said I asked the question, what would be like some common best practices for like how you set up your compressor for different uses. So like if we want to do a snare or like just say like percussion, like you got a loop and it's like drumstick tapping or something, we want to have it set
Yeah.
really, really short attack, really, really short release. You know, maybe we could go through some common uses like that.
Yeah, for sure. So like on a vocal, typically I tell like especially beginners who are trying to engineer, don't go past about 10 dB worth of gain reduction or else you're going to hear it. I'm going to hear it even if you don't, right? So that's kind of like a rule of thumb when treating a vocal specifically, right? With snares and other things like that, it's not so much a level issue of like a tone issue. So if you're looking to achieve different things out of your snare drum, right? So if you want more, like a lot of the times, I'll use an EQ to bring the wood out of a snare drum instead of compression. I just find like if you're trying to compress like the low end of a snare, you're grabbing things you don't really want as well. So I'll use an EQ in that situation around 200 hertz on kind of like a bell curve to add some depth and wood to that snare sound, right? Other things like I'm trying to think. Some of these plugins like this distressor, it'll have like a mix knob where you can gain parallel compression too, right? Or you can set it up in a bus where you send your audio out to another aux channel that's compressing, and then mix the two together, and you got parallel that way too, right? So that's helpful if you're trying to retain, say, the original sound of whatever that sound is, plus add some spice to it in some way. So if a snare sounds great the way it is, but you want more snap to it without modifying the way it sounds, you just put another channel up, send to it, toss the compression on there with the late attack and like a fast release on there, and then mix it back into that original sound, and you'll have the same thing with that added snap to it, right? Instead of kind of like modifying the original one to get the snap, and you've lost something that you wanted to retain with that, right? Does that kind of answer that? I don't think I
Yeah,
did.
no, definitely. Just some general tips and things to go by. Like I was saying, like hey, what would be like the most common time that you would set like a really long release on
Yeah,
a compressor?
so I'm thinking like in a bass line on a real acoustic, or yeah, like an electric bass where you've recorded like a DI signal and you've got some notes that are like happening fast, and then you've got some like drawn out notes right after that that you want to tame down or something, right?
Hmm.
And then you'd set a huge long release on it, but then a late attack so that you're getting the bop 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 bop, and then when it boom, right, you're gonna tame that second half of it only, right?
Hmm.
So just different uses. But then typically, if I'm just doing a bass guitar track, for instance, I kind of leave the attack and the release kind of in the middle. I'm not going to kind of put it fast or slow for bass. Just most tracks work that way with bass, right?
Yeah.
There's different situations where you got to change it to kind of like fit the envelope of how they're playing or whatever. It's based on the speed of the track too, right?
Yeah.
So we have like, whenever we're compressing, we're dealing with timelines of like anywhere from 200 to 1 second worth of time, really, not really much longer than that of an audio signal, right? So then the way your beat structure of your song is to make that compressor recover in time might need to be faster depending on how fast they're playing, right?
Okay. Nice. Nice.
Other things I'll use on a kick drum, for example, I'll purposely put the release on it really fast to get that like open, wide sound that you get off the second half of the sound of a kick drum. So not the attack portion, but then it gets that like really tubby, huge sound to it when you do that.
Hmm.
I love that sound. Like literally, like I have a sample library, Sunny Lax Kick Essentials,
Yeah.
Volume One and Volume Two. Those kick drums are ridiculously good because they sound exactly like that. Like that Swedish House Mafia kick drum stuff.
Yeah, that's how they're achieving a lot of that stuff, is just by setting a compressor the right way on it, right? Like achieving that huge, wide open, bigger than life back end of a kick drum that we really don't hear in real life, right?
Yeah. Hey, Chris, whenever you were going over the makeup gain, did you talk about setting that in relation to how much you're ducking?
I do it audibly personally. Like I'll do it. So I'm like, it's really, is it gonna break your audio if the signal's higher after it comes out of compressor? Not really, right?
Hmm.
But a lot of these like classic compressor emulations, they'll have transformer circuits emulated on the outputs of these things, and they can distort or change the actual audio depending on where you set them, right? So I mean, you can definitely do it digitally where you set it the exact amount that you've ducked or whatever, but
Hmm.
how do you do that? I just like to do it audibly where you just can't tell that you put it on, right?
I got you.
Because say you have, it depends on the signal really, right? If you're treating a track that's not too erratic, you can do more of a digital match, right?
Hmm.
If you have certain notes are massive and other ones are tiny, then no matter where you set that thing, they're gonna have a problem, right?
Yeah. So it's almost like if you were to use that digital method, it's almost better using it on a single instrument or like a single track versus using it on a bus or something like that.
Yeah, and more so like a steady state sound, like a synth pad or something,
Yeah,
more so than something that's got a lot of transients happening often, right?
I hear you. Missed this. Alec asked a question. He said, "What's a good indication that you are correctly compressing over under compressing?"
So like i.e. over compressing versus under compressing. What's a good way to to tell if you're going about it the wrong way? Or because I know Sometimes, especially at the beginner when you're doing it, it's hard to hear
Right.
what you're doing wrong. So it's hard to tell if you're overdoing it or underdoing it.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of it comes down to that acoustical being able to hear it part again, right? Which I mean, I can just hear everything in this room today, so it's kind of a mute point for me. But as far as knowing what to look for when you over compress something, it depends on what you're over compressing. If it's a vocal, it'll sound like they're struggling for air between notes, like they're
Mhm,
going like sucking in when they do their
mhm,
like just a regular sounding like air breathe, right? Like stuff like that. You'll start hearing it. It's almost like they're like out of breath and like running or something. You can
Mhm.
literally like feel an energy come out of a vocal when it's wrong. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Something more like on a kick drum when it's too hard hitting. You're gonna hear it like just kind of like go away if the compression hits it too hard. It's gonna be like boom and be like gone for a second or something, right?
Hmm.
And that comes to matching it with the makeup gain again, kind of bringing that sound back to where it should be. If you set that wrong, you're gonna have like a ducking happening on purpose where that thing's gonna go away for a second, right?
Yeah.
And then if you're under compressing, I find this most with like vocals where it just sounds unfinished if it's not compressed enough, right? Where you have like certain volume of notes jumping out of the speakers at you when they shouldn't be,
Okay.
right? And that really comes down to having a good treated acoustic room again, because how do you feel those sound pressures in your ear if everything's not accurate, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, in headphones, you can get like SonarWorks flattening software for headphones too that make a select group of headphones flat just for mixing, right? And that then it can become really just like this room. Like I have that stuff for my headphones and I can't tell the difference.
So that brings up another question then. So like I don't I want to get monitors eventually, but right now I'm just using Sennheisers.
Yeah.
And so I wonder, because I have hearing issues, I was wondering, like, is there any advantage or disadvantage towards open back or closed back when you're compressing or mixing?
I wouldn't say so. It's more so for like the ability to have like the open back headphones tend to be the higher end headphones just
Hmm.
because they have technologies built into them to allow that sound pressure to be more even so they can get more accuracy out of it, right?
Hmm.
And then I mean, closed back ones were made for the studio, so you couldn't hear the sound coming out of them. It had a totally different use, right? So
Yeah.
I don't think as far as like accuracy of sound, you're gonna have better results just with an open back one, but I don't
Okay.
think it'll change the way you hear things, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I gotta go. I'm sorry.
No worries,
Oh,
man. Thanks for joining us.
yeah, thanks for coming,
No
man.
problem. Yeah, I appreciate. Dude, I learned so much. Thank you.
Perfect. That's what
Awesome.
we're doing it for.
Awesome.
Peace.
Take it easy, man.
Cheers.
Hey, looks like Mike's got a question for you there,
Hey,
Chris.
what's up, Mike?
It wasn't really a question. It was more of I wanted to elaborate on one of the last topic. If you if you're struggling to hear, um, if you're struggling to hear like compression and you can't really tell what you're doing, if it's making an effect or anything, I always tell people to create a parallel compression channel or a parallel saturation channel or aux and set it as extreme as you can get, and then play with the mix, and then you'll hear how awful it sounds. Like it sounds terrible by itself,
Right.
but when you roll mix back in with the source audio, you'll then start to hear what's getting pulled out and what's getting crushed and what's not leveled and what's distorting what on that track itself. So like if you just run just anything into a parallel compressor and crank the piss out of it and really crush it,
Right.
you'll start to notice just listening to that source where the distortion's coming from or where the lack of compression is or things of that nature. I tell people to go fast and break stuff all the time because
I actually
it's not on tape anymore. So you could literally do anything.
I use this guy
And
right here on mine, this constant gain monitoring button right here on my master
yeah,
mix, right? And it'll really like if I were to turn this on and put this, hear the difference?
yeah,
right? And you can really hear like how it's destroying it, right? So that it's almost like the guaranteed way to know how it's happening, right? Like
Yeah,
some of the plugins have it now, but you can really start to hear that when you've gone too far, right? So just go too
right.
far on purpose, and then you're right. Find out where is that spot, right?
Yeah, that's the great thing about digital is unlike the analog world. Like if I were to do that with my hardware, I could break that. If I
Right.
were to do that on an analog console, there's a potential that I could break it, but some of
Like
the
something
hardware tolerances are so good that
right.
it adds color and saturation and warmth and stuff like that. But in the digital space, you can go to extremes of everything without fear of hurting anything as long as you have enough CPU power, which most computers do.
Yeah, mine does. It's all good.
Yeah.
Nice.
I gotta put this back where it was. I think it was like 1.4 or something.
Yeah, thanks for, hey man, by the way, thanks for messing around with your project for your baby, your track you just put out there, man. I definitely, I know I wouldn't feel too great about just messing around with all my stuff and some of mine, so I definitely do appreciate it, man. This has been awesome. But
I'd say it went pretty well, honestly.
yeah, we're at about an hour. I'll go on ahead and say let's call the recording. Chris, if you want to kick everybody off, I completely